Hi, welcome back to Work in Progress. I'm Sante Feaster, and today we have with us journalist Andie Sophia Fontaine from the Reykjavík Grapevine, Paula Gold, and Jeffrey Garino. Could everyone come say hi?
Hello.
Hello.
Today we're going to be talking about cancel culture, what is cancel culture in Iceland, and how it affects people in Icelandic society, or who it affects mainly in Icelandic society. So the floor is open to everyone, of course.
Okay. Well, I think we talked about it last time. I liked what I heard from Paula, what you were saying, the consequences of the culture, both positive and negative, and its uses as it can be a positive and negative force.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Andie, one of the things that we were talking about in our planning call for this talk was I found it interesting about like the pushback against cancel culture, right? So like, there's a vocal group, usually the people who are, the subject of cancel culture, right? Who are like, oh, we can't just fall into this cancel culture stuff. But I made the observation that in Iceland, cancel culture has been a tool for change for a very long time, and specifically the media. So, I gave an example of how, you as an individual go to, like, you have a conflict or you have a mistreatment, and you go to address that mistreatment or tell somebody about it. And there's this kind of like general apathy in a lot of ways. Or you go to have, like, let's say in a business context, something corrected, and you're just kind of shut down. But if you take that issue to the Icelandic media and tell your story, a lot of times that just, rallies everyone in theory to support you. And then that forces kind of a public change for that particular instance. And so I have found, and actually have had people kind of joke about it, like, well, if you can't fight the problem yourself, just go to the media about it. So it'd be really interesting to hear your perspective on, especially as a media person, is cancel culture isn't really new to Iceland. It's just like a higher incidence of public accountability, in my view.
Yes. Well, first, I think it's important that we define our terms. Like, when people talk about somebody or something being canceled, I find that like 19 times out of 20, what has actually happened is that person or thing has been criticized. Like, I've yet to see, for example, famous people have sometimes stepped in it here in Iceland. I've not seen them do anything that's absolutely career ending. There's like very powerful people who have been repeatedly accused of doing awful things with very compelling and very solid evidence, nonetheless soldier on, and their careers continue to flourish, though they have like this reputation hanging over them, like nothing is ending their career. I've seen companies that have exploited foreign workers who simply declare bankruptcy, and then those workers are just like in a recent court case, just like left holding the bag where they don't get their money. So I'm wondering who exactly gets canceled in Iceland anyway? When does this ever happen? What I have seen though is, as you said, like on a particular instance, when it comes to like a company or an individual, when somebody has abused their power, when it attracts media attention, then this person is at least forced to answer for, to like step out into the public light and address the accusations that have been made. Whereas if this was something that happened behind closed doors, they could just sweep it under the rug, or HR could stick it in a drawer somewhere, and the whole thing just disappears. But as we all know, people who are in positions of power and positions of great privilege, criticism alone feels like an attack to them. It feels very much like they're being treated harshly and unfairly simply to get feedback from the people that they've stepped on intentionally or otherwise. So I have yet to see, I don't know, I've yet to see anyone's career just utterly destroyed for once and for all as a result of things that they've done, including like, take just one example. I'm sorry to go on like this, but like Geir Hodde, who was the former prime minister of Iceland during the bank crash, David Oddsson, who was the chair of the central bank during the crash. You know, these are two people who, in the opinion of the Special Investigative Commission anyway, played key roles in destroying the economy. And today, Geir Hodde is, he's got a diplomatic position in the US. David Oddsson is the editor of Iceland's oldest newspaper. Like, were they canceled? Or were they just harshly criticized and featured very prominently in the media for a while?
Right.
I don't know.
And what do you think that, like, you know, the four of us, just by happenstance, are all from the States. How would you compare that to, let's say, like cancel culture in the US, or like criticism of executives in the US? Do you think that there's been, or really anywhere, but I'm just using the frame of reference because that's where we're all from. Do you think that there is like a difference? Like, are people, and I, you know, like, are they made of Teflon here? Like, what's the difference in the accountability from your perspective?
I don't think there is a difference, to be honest. One thing that came up recently that I've seen on TikTok is, and is being splashed across other social media platforms, is that Eminem is canceled. And I shook my head at this because I was like, wait a second, hasn't he been canceled since like 2004? Like, this is the very first time he opened his mouth and started dropping these songs. Like, and his career, he's a multimillionaire. He's like producing albums. He's continuing to rap. He's got like a flourishing career. He's not canceled. Ditto when it comes to the corporate world, like Dick Cheney, one of the architects of the Iraq War. Again, a multimillionaire. He's doing speaking engagements. He's doing consultation. Hasn't lost any of his wealth or power or influence. Henry Kissinger is pals with Hillary Clinton, and he's like what, 200 years now or something? He's a very old man, and his career has not waned one bit. I don't know exactly what privileged and powerful people get canceled. Who do get canceled often, though, and if we're defining canceled as their career and their lives are over, are people who speak truth to power, who do challenge people in powerful and privileged positions. Those are the people who risk everything and sometimes lose everything trying to stand up to powerful people. Yeah. And so that's why it kind of perplexes me to hear like powerful people moaning about cancel culture. Like, you'll be fine, you're just being criticized.
I think
that's a good point. And the States especially, like we had a Senator Al Franken who was like one of the best speakers. He was a comedian. He was one of the best speakers in the Senate for left-leaning policies. And he was so good at dismantling false arguments and strawman arguments that were put forth. And of course, he was taken in some kind of really stupid picture with him and a female, him faking to grab her breast or something. And
a woman.
Immediately, the Democratic Party was like, he's got to go. He's done. He's got to go. And some people were like, okay, but he's one of the best speakers you have. And he left, and it seems like one side, politically in the States, it seems that way. One side is very much like, just get rid of them. They're gone. We don't want to hear from them. Push them aside if something like this happens. But then you get someone like Donald Trump, and it's like, it blows up for a little bit. But like you said, anyone with any real kind of power, it like blows up for a bit. But it's kind of like, yeah, and it goes by the wayside. So I think on a political spectrum, there's a difference in the cancel culture right and left as well.
That's an excellent point.
As far as paying the price, I think we as people, and with the internet as it is, and with the media landscape as it is, the way things are so 24/7 inundated with information, that those blow up, and then it's like, well, okay, that's done. What's the next one?
Yeah.
And nothing really sticks.
I was going to say, I think for example, from the US, someone who was canceled, and I think it shows you who's expendable. It was a few years ago, the man, I actually cannot tell you what he did right now. I don't remember exactly, but he got in trouble because he filmed himself at Chick-fil-A. And I believe he was speaking horribly to the drive-through worker or something like this. And what followed was that he lost his job. He couldn't find a similar position in his field, and he was the CEO of some random company, if you will. And he did interviews. He was like, I lost my job, and he was on like public assistance on food stamps, and his life was really tragic and sad after he did this thing. But I feel like this shows you who's expendable, because I feel like in Iceland, the issue is nepotism or relation to families, because I've seen people pumping gas and I'm like, isn't this the guy who was in the news and he's in trouble for something? Like, oh yeah, he got moved from this position over here to this one over here, and he took like a small pay cut, but then he's actually going to get a bonus from this thing. And I was like, so you didn't really get in trouble. You actually got to go on vacation, continue getting a paycheck, and then you got a bonus. So to me, you were in the news for a bit, and it was like, oh, that thing. Let's go to Tenerife for a little bit and let it blow over. And then you come back to Iceland and you still have your job, you still have your life. But for example, the restaurant, I don't think I will name them, the restaurant that was shut down somewhere downtown, and all their workers who didn't have their money, like Andie said, they filed for bankruptcy, got a new owner. And, people started going there again because they're like, oh, we're under new management. We didn't do that really bad thing to those people, but they still don't have their money. So who suffered the consequence? Not the reputation of the restaurant, obviously. The people who worked and did not get any pay, which is absurd.
I wonder too why we can't differentiate between criticism and canceling, right? Like, I feel in my career or just my life, like I've been held accountable for any number of things. I think women bear this, like a lot more than men do, at least from my experience. Like, like I have never not been aware of where my blind spots are, where my flaws are, where my weaknesses are, where my missteps were, the failures that I had. Like people were pretty clear about communicating those things. So I always find it funny, especially like in a business context or in the political spectrum, where you have people in positions of leadership who haven't had to go through that process of, like figuring yourself out and learning how to speak. And if you make an ignorant statement from either an experience or the way you grew up, like, like taking ownership of that and, apologizing, digesting the mistake that you made and then correcting it going forward. And there's so many individuals that are high profile or in high positions that feel that it is their job or their responsibility, especially if they have subordinates, to communicate to them how those people can just be better people and better in their jobs and better leaders. But here in Iceland in particularly, but I of course also saw this in some cases in the States, the feedback loop up where you're saying, like, I want you to be a better leader and a better boss and a better person. And here are some things that I think you kind of fall short on. And I find in Iceland, in my experience, there's a lot more consequence to that feedback. Like there's not a structure maybe for that criticism, and then it becomes like I'm getting canceled, right?
I would say I would agree with you, but I think the problem is that this is some kind of, I think it's gender bias and gender conditioning, in both the States and here, and it's also the power structure, like you said, it always goes from the top to the bottom. It does not go up. So I tell you what to do. You don't tell me what to do because I'm always right. And in the sense, when I say gender bias, I've noticed for many men in the workplace, everything they're doing is correct. It's great. And everyone else should follow their lead. As a Black woman in the workplace, I've always been told, I've always, you're not smiling enough. Do you have an attitude today? All these things where, of course, I don't think anyone would come to a white, middle-aged white man and tell him to smile at work more. You're not smiling enough. When you're just
Totally going to start doing
to
that
go on
now.
your lunch break. I've never seen it happen. I've had bosses in Iceland where if they have a terrible day, we need to accept that. They're human. If you do that, what's your problem? We need to talk. You can't come into the workplace with this attitude. But I've seen men in these positions have temper tantrums at work. And then it's like, it's fine. And I'm like, this is not fine. This is weird. And everyone should just take cover, wait for the storm to blow over, and then, oh, okay, everything is fine. The way I just spoke to you was acceptable because I'm better now. This would never sit if I came into work with that kind of attitude. So I definitely agree with what you said.
I couldn't imagine. I mean, I've held CEOs here accountable for their very absurd temper tantrums and retaliatory behavior. And
I did it and I got fired.
I said, well, if not that, certainly a lot of friction. But I said, I could never walk into this room and do that and have that be acceptable to speak to anyone in that way. But this brings me back to kind of like a canceling thing. So we're not empowered in these environments politically, in the community leadership, at work. So the only real avenue we have here in Iceland that's been effective has been to rally either, like set your Facebook post to public or post it in a group setting, or go to the media. And I have found, for the most part, the media has been very sympathetic to that or open to that. And in some cases, with some of the more tabloids focused ones, just really anxious to exploit that for whether it's clicks or whatever. What did you say, Andie?
Oh, good.
You're on mute.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Jeffrey. You spoke first.
Can you hear me? Okay, my mic looks like it's weird. Okay, what I was going to say is my experience as far as being a foreigner in the States, it's, I grew up, you're kind of groomed to be a go-getter in a lot of respects and to kind of prove yourself at your jobs, let's say. And the work that I've done in Iceland, where I would try to improve my work because I see something's wrong, has consistently been met with dismissal. And I find that counterproductive because the one thing that I've learned in the States about foreigners and native populations that I've seen in the States is this kind of misunderstanding about what the contribution is and why they're there. For the first couple of years I lived in Iceland, people asked, "Why did you come here?" and it wasn't mean. I think it was really curious. Like, you're from the States, you came to a smaller place. Why did you do that? Kind of thing, And to answer that question, it's my wife, which most men will follow the woman, so that's not that's not a surprise. But again, being a foreigner in Iceland, I wanted to contribute. I wanted to be a part of. I felt a need to Just like when I lived in the States, I felt the need to give back to the society in which I was in. But I found that to be dismissed. And when you talk about cancel culture in context of Iceland, like you said, I'm not sure I've really seen it. And because I don't know what that, I know what it looks like in the States, and I've seen it in the States. And of course, we've seen high profile cases or whatnot. But I think Iceland is so small and there's so many connections, very close. Like, you know, they say you throw a rock and hit a relative. That I think that brings another dynamic to it all, which might make it a little more difficult. Like, how am I supposed to trash my cousin? You know, I got to see him at Thanksgiving or whatever, you know? I wonder if you could speak on that, Andy.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I do have to say that the media in Iceland is also not entirely blameless when it comes to this. A former editor of mine, Anna Anderson, very astutely pointed out that whereas, as the cliche goes, there are no second acts in American life, Icelanders love a good comeback story. And it doesn't matter what you did. If you're a famous person and you absolutely torpedoed your own career, just go to rehab, wait a couple of years, and you will get like a kit glove cover story interview where you get pitched a bunch of softball questions and you get to talk about how mean everybody was to you for this very human thing that you did. And so like the media is a little bit complicit in this, I feel like. But adding to this, like, since you had brought up Al Franken, I think another aspect of this, though, is that it doesn't really work if the reason why some people don't end up getting canceled, why some powerful people don't end up getting canceled once and for all, is because it requires believing that you did something wrong. You know, like Al Franken, I believe, is a decent man. And when these photograph was brought to light, like, I sincerely believe he took this to heart and believed, yeah, I really messed up and I should maybe step out of the spotlight for a while, which he did. The meantime, like, I've seen other people, like, since Donald Trump was mentioned, I don't think that he has a contrite bone in his body. Like, he will never like admit, like, I'm sorry, I messed up. That was really inappropriate of me to say that. Those words will never come out of his mouth. And so any sort of criticism thrown his way is completely ineffective. But I think that you're right, Jeffrey, when you mentioned like the close ties that exist in this country, that people are going to be very reluctant to, as you say, criticize their own cousins. And feeding into this, I think, is that in order to get ahead in this country, like, let's not kid ourselves, we're not exactly living in a meritocracy. Like, it's a lot about who you know and who can help you out, who's in like a slightly better position. And people don't want to burn bridges that they haven't come to yet. Maybe they're going to get to a point where they might need this person's help. And so they'll either stay silent or they'll even step up and defend them because they think it might benefit them in some way. A good example of this would be Sigmund David Gunnlaugsson, who, like, well, we know what happened with the Panama Papers. I don't need to rehash that for you. But when he decided he was going to start his own party, like, 2 weeks before the elections, all of a sudden, all these people from the Progressive Party saw a golden opportunity and they just rushed under his banner. And they definitely benefited from it. They stayed silent during the Panama Papers thing. And the moment he decided, you know what, I'm not done. I still like being a powerful person. I like being in charge of a political party. They rushed to his side. So the nepotism, the networking that occurs here, like, is, yeah, I think that you're absolutely right. That definitely does contribute to people's reluctance, shall we say, to speak up.
I also want to point out, like, I had a discussion earlier today just a casual discussion with some friends about bullying, and how, you know, even if somebody might feel that a person did something wrong and they feel like they should stand up against that injustice, whether it's, you know, a micro injustice or an egregious one, it is, for like a self-protective reason, easier for them to align under the umbrella of the bully to protect themselves from the fallout from standing up. To your point about, you know, people who stand up to, you know, different injustices or different work environments or political environments, you know, it comes at great cost. Like the consequences leveled against somebody who's standing up for something just is so much more significant than the consequences for the person perpetrating the injustice. And we were talking about how sometimes as immigrants, we feel isolated, especially if we're the only immigrant in the office or the only immigrant in a group setting. You know, that like we stand up for ourselves, and that immediately has like, you know, just like you can feel the room just, you know, pull back. Even if they agree with you, they might privately message you that you were right, which is not at all helpful. And so you feel really isolated. And I've had instances where I've stood up to bullies in many different contexts, whether it's at work or elsewhere, where I would get those private messages or, you know, sidebar conversations, but everyone was just happy to have me take care of the problem and bear all of the consequence. And then like later on, when those same people who maybe backed away or just took the side of the bully, that bully then inevitably, as they always do, turns that bullying onto them, right? Like when you run out of people to bully, you just hit the ones closest to you. And have come back and said, like, you know what, you were right about that situation, or I regret that I didn't stand with you in that. And it's validating in a sense, because you do in that moment feel so like, you know, alone, or did you misread it? Are you overreacting? But it's also deeply angering because like, what is that apology to me now? Right? So, and I think that that is like a reason why, you know, more and more people are, I almost feel like going to the media with a problem gives you even greater shelter, right? It gives you that immediate defense. You know, the same umbrella maybe that the person causing the injustice had, right? That community that's formed out of it. And that is something that I really like about living here, where it's so brave to speak your truth or your experiences to the media in such a public forum, and then have that deep anxiety, you know, that like, how is this going to impact me? And then more often than not, the person who's victimized by an injustice suddenly has this, you know, large group of support.
I'm actually inclined to agree with you. I brought it up before about how I was working, you know, at a certain hotel, and the manager, his behavior was really unacceptable. And I was surprised that no one else around me was saying anything. And the remarks that were being made towards me, I was like, is this, I said, to me, this is not normal to say to anyone on your staff. And I spoke with the other staff that were all women. And they were like, yeah, this is how he is. And, you know, I'm shocked that you would say that to him. And I said, well, you shouldn't come to work and have to feel this way. I'm surprised no one has said anything for some time. And, you know, I spoke to this person, and they were very open about having a dislike for women. I'm not surprised. And no shame in that. And like, I'm not going to apologize for it either, that I don't like women. I have an issue with my mom. So now you all pay. And, you know, after multiple times of trying to talk to them and work this out, because we're both adults, there was no give from this person. And one of my friends said, oh, I know this person who works, I can't remember, at some magazine, you should talk to them. And I did an interview with this person, and they were really surprised that this is happening. I was not. But I think as a foreigner, we hear lots of stories like that amongst ourselves in Iceland, where you're being mistreated at work. And everyone's like, oh, well, you know, you need a job. And that is part of the problem. yeah, you need a job. I can't really stand up to you because I'm going to get fired because I've spoken back too much in front of too many people. And from, for almost all of us, that's our livelihood. And, that's the problem I had. I did the interview. I told my boss to read it. He did. And I did get fired eventually, for some other reason. It just wasn't a good fit. But what can you do? I think these problems they have to change eventually, in some form, whether it be from pressure from the media or pressure from the other higher up saying, okay, this can't happen anymore because it's becoming a pattern. But so far in this place of this establishment, it's a pattern, but there are other incredulous things, if you will, happening. So I think that's a part of the problem. As foreigners, we know this is our livelihood, so you can only do so much without having to sacrifice yourself. Like you said, you are the one to stand up, but you receive all of the consequences. You receive all the backlash from you being the only person to speak up to your boss about bullying or mistreatment in the workplace.
It reminds me of when we did our protest, and I was asked by two reporters, why should we care? And that always just it's just hangs in my head. But because as human beings, I think we move selfishly for the most part. And the reason to care, there's an acceptance of mediocrity has been my frustration the majority of the time I've worked and lived in Iceland. Is like you have someone who's mediocre at what they're doing, and they're allowed to just sit there. And I've lived in the States my whole life. This is the first time I've been outside of the country. So it was like a big shock because in the States, if you come across someone who is not doing their job well, eventually they won't have that job. It'll come to light. I'll give you an example. I worked as a manager for McDonald's, and I was fired for stealing. It turned out that fortunately the owner of the business knew me and didn't believe that that was the case. So he looked into it, and it came to be that the manager who was working before me had set me up. And if it wasn't for the owner taking a look into it because it didn't sound right to him, I would have been fired and had that over my head. And this manager would have been stealing from it continually. It was, and it was that's the kind of, like, if I work for somebody and I have that old school mentality, your name is on your work kind of thing. And here I kind of work that way for anyone I work for. If I'm working for you, I feel it's my job to do the best job I can. But more times than not, I've come up against someone who wasn't really qualified above me. And when I pointed out things that would benefit the business, it was like I got told, "What do you think? You're special? What do you think you think you're better than everybody?" I mean, I got all these kind of like pushbacks, and my stance was always, well, no, but this is a problem. This can lead to this. And I've left a lot of jobs like that. I'm in a job now where I see these things, and most of the things that I've pointed out have come to pass and have been reconciled later. And without any of my input being the impetus or recognized for having pointed out an issue. We had upper management. Now, I don't know if I should, but you can figure it out. I work at an establishment municipality. And the upper management had said they were going to do a change. And I said, well, gee, maybe you should look into doing this specific thing. That might save money. And they were like, yeah, we're not looking at that now. I said, yeah, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And so I was like, okay. And they ended up doing what I said they should do. I don't know if it was solely because of me, I doubt it, but it was something that I felt, I could contribute. And the fact that there was no acknowledgement, there's never really been any acknowledgement. It's more like if you point something out, you're a problem. And I think this is what we're talking about when we talk about cancel culture. Somebody brings up an issue, and how is it seen? Is it seen as a problem? And I think if it's coming from Útlendingers or foreigners, it's a problem for the majority. It's not like, oh, we could do something better, or we can fix this, or this is not the direction we want to go. It's just, this is a problem. Yeah, we'll move on.
Doesn't that speak to intersectionality though, and like the crux of the problem that we're discussing quite a lot across all media platforms right now, with like, instead of like forcing people to assimilate to Iceland, we should build a society that incorporates the increasingly diverse groups of people and thought that has contributed to making Icelandic society, progress.
We did bring that up last time.
Years. I mean, I think it has a lot to do with that, and I also think that you get back to like certain prominent people being in the media for missteps or like egregious crimes, and you get into a debate about, well, should that person's name be in the media? Like you brought up the point about how the media contributes to part of the problem, right? By throwing these softball questions. Part of that to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but part of that to me falls back on that, like that kind of death threat of the slander law, right? Like people, like there's no referencing back or backlinks back to articles from when there was a crime. And a lot of times I'm told, I was even told when I was vocal about some sort of an injustice, close Icelandic friends and family of mine were afraid that I would, because my Facebook post was public, that I would be sued for slander. And I was like, but they did that thing. it's in the public. And that I didn't, it was crazy to me to think that as an individual, like, well, I'm not a citizen yet, but hopefully we'll be soon. Maybe not after this call. But like as a resident, like why wouldn't I be able to say something? Like why am I gonna get like lambasted or sued or like vilified for like pointing out that this crime was awful and I don't agree with it?
You won't.
And why is it so entrenched in Icelandic culture that an individual's like, don't do it, or you'll be sued?
I can give you like a real life example. This is a common misconception that comes up a lot, and I think it speaks to how we as foreigners believe that. I mean, the deck is stacked against us. Some people more than others, depending on where you're from, the color of your skin, what religion you practice, etc. However, there was a case once where there was a bunch of workers at a restaurant who came to the IWW Iceland, which is a radical solidarity union, and they had a list of grievances and a list of complaints, and their boss wasn't listening to them, and we suggested setting up an information picket. This is a very common practice in the United States, virtually unheard of in Iceland, that there's a picket line. Workers just go on strike and stay home. But they wanted to hang out in front of this restaurant with brochures listing all the ways that they were mistreated and handing them to people walking into this place. And my immediate reaction was, wow, they could get sued, or we could get sued for organizing this. And so I contacted a lawyer. And the lawyer told me, well, the restaurant owners could try to sue you, but Icelandic law actually protects you from this. In fact, if they tried to sue you, they would probably lose and have to pay your legal fees. And I was frankly surprised to hear this. because I was operating under the misconception that by virtue of them being foreign workers, that, everything is stacked against us. And that is, the deck is stacked against us in a lot of ways, but if you're a worker and you've been mistreated in the workplace and you want to tell your story, you can absolutely do so. Where libel comes into play is when you accuse your employer of committing a felony. Like if you say, like, I know for a fact that my boss was transferring money from the company's bank account into their personal bank account, and you have absolutely no evidence for this, yeah, they could absolutely sue you for that. But if you go forward to say, like, my boss was a sexist pig who said a lot of inappropriate stuff in the workplace, and he would often throw temper tantrums, and he just made it a really hostile work environment. I mean, no, you can't get sued for that. And I try to convey this a lot to people who are scared to go to the media. There's like a lot of pieces of advice I would give to people who want to talk to the media, and that would be absolutely one of them.
That's fascinating to know, because like I've even heard, like I remember I delivered some action items to a former Minister of Industry and Innovation, and it criticized some people in the corporate supply chain, if you will, like finance, things like that, institutions. And I remember dealing with somebody saying to us, like, wow, like you really can't get thanks for anything. Like, this is how we're thanked. We should sue for slander or something like that. And I was just really surprised that that was thrown around so quickly as a silencing tactic. And because it's thrown around so much, when somebody in a position of power or authority is telling you that they will level that power and authority over you and just make your life miserable, whether they have a legal framework to do that or not, just that threat is silencing enough. And the interesting thing is that those people that are getting canceled are those same people, like they're the same people that's, like, okay, you can make sure that I don't get another job. So when I go to get another job and somebody just calls you, you can't, like you're essentially threatening that you're going to give them a bad review because I've given you feedback. And I think that a lot of foreigners living in Iceland contend with that. And I presume that Icelanders contend with that because the power structure is not just leveled at foreigners. We're just speaking about that because that's our, we are foreigners. But I think that that's really interesting. And the other thing I wanted to ask you, Andie, was journalists are out in the media, out in the public, right, through their media platforms. And you guys, you just all receive so much criticism for what you write. And like, how do you deal with that? Like, how does that fit into the context of being canceled? Like, what goes on with like that feeling and that feedback, and what are some kind of maybe pain points that you've seen, either your own or in the media in general, where a journalist has been dragged, or there's like a fight between two publications and one's going after the other?
You mean how do I respond to this?
Yeah.
How do I deal with this? Cry. Cry a lot.
Yeah.
Curl up in a ball and complain about my job, and then get up the next morning and do it all over again. That's pretty much what I do. I'm definitely not in this racket for the money. I'm definitely not in this racket for the power. What I'm hoping to do is to be able to inform the public of their material conditions, because people cannot act on what they don't know. If you don't know the conditions of the society that you live in, you cannot respond to them. But when it's just the nature of the job that, like, no one is going to feel the burning urge to sit down and write an email to a journalist to say, hey, you're doing a great job. I love your articles. People are going to feel the urge to write a letter to a journalist to say, you suck. I hate your articles. You're an absolute hack. And so that's why most of the feedback that you get is going to be negative. People just assume that you know that you're doing a good job, because otherwise, why would you keep writing? But when it comes to like beefs between different publications, it's very passive aggressive. It's more underhanded by like not recognizing that this competing publication broke a story by simply not covering it, which I think is
to tell me there's newspaper beef in the streets of Reykjavik.
There are in fact, and I feel very fortunate to be at the Grapevine because we're in this weird gray area where we don't write in Icelandic, so we're not considered Icelandic media, but we're based in Iceland, so we're not foreign media either. And so neither one of these things apply to us. We're just kind of like we're outside the binary, as it were. But the way that like competing publications typically like come at one another, I guess, is by just not picking up the stories that they've picked up on, and this has happened to the Grapevine, like it's happened on more than one occasion that we've broken a story and another publication will contact the same people that we contacted, get their own quotes, and then run the story without saying that we were the first to report on it. And that's technically fair. It's not really cool, but it's technically okay to do that. But as like a matter of professional courtesy, like you're technically supposed to say, you know, Rúf greindi fyrst frá að da 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 da. But that doesn't apply to us for whatever reason. But at the same time, it does mean that as a journalist, I can be highly opinionated on social media. I can speak my mind and not worry about people being like, hey, aren't you a journalist? What are you doing? Like having opinions in public, because people expect us to be like walking cameras and microphones, like robots who have no opinions of their own. I have the freedom to do that. And that's really great. But it's also very frustrating to see that like, as hard as we work, we're all in the same union as our colleagues. We go to the same press conferences. We cover a lot of the same stories. We do a lot of original reporting too, I might add. We're still not really considered colleagues by a lot of publications. I wouldn't say all of them. Like a lot of them have been really cool to us, and we've done great partnership works with them before. But it's because of this power play between the different publications, it's another thing that is another element of cancel culture in Iceland. It's like if a prominent figure has been criticized in one publication, like other media outlets might be reluctant to pick up this story because they don't want to get dragged into the mud, and they don't want to have to face the threats and the possible, exploding of their careers if a reporter or an editor or a publisher wants to like have any kind of future. That is until the subject becomes so huge and so out of hand that they can't ignore it anymore.
And I've actually seen what you just spoke about. I actually think with the Reykjavík Grapevine, they ran a story, and then I saw another publication. They call the same sources, and we've had some discussion about it amongst my friend groups. And we brought it up in our other meeting. What would you say is different generation to generation about being canceled? Because I feel like for older generations, being canceled is being criticized, like Paula said. We're asking for some kind of improvement on something, and you're canceling me because you said you don't like the way I swear at you in the workplace. For example, I only heard about this from Instagram, the youngin that I am. Army Hammer, I've never heard of this person before. He's being canceled because I believe he's an actor, and he has some fantasies about cannibalism and killing and eating people. That's were basically exposed. So he lost, I believe he lost a few jobs, or maybe he had a really big role that he was going to star in. And I noticed a lot of younger generations where they're like, no, he can't do these things. Don't watch his movies. He's, I believe a diary or some texts got exposed where he was graphically talking about the things he wanted to do. And I noticed a lot of those older Instagram handles were like, these are fantasies. We can't, he never said he was going to do them, things like that. And so I wonder, how is it different from generation to generation? Because, yeah, for me, yes, it's definitely weird to hear that about someone. Of course, I don't know this person personally, so I hope to never cross paths with him either. Thank you, Mr. Hammer. This is something that I was thinking about, is how different is it from generation to generation, even though I would like to say in full faith that it is very hard to cancel a rich white man, because that is a fact. But anyway, Armie Hammer is a rich white man, but as they say, Gen Z is canceling him. What do you think about that?
What do I think about that?
What everyone thinks, because for example, I've never heard of this person until I saw these things on Instagram, and I was like, oh my God, this is not a good introduction to this person. He has been in some movies, but not enough for me to remember his name, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, like his team, from what I've read, like I know of him and I've seen movies that he's been in. But I think that, there's probably going to be a lot of people, or probably already are a lot of people who have had to interface at the team level, particularly the PR side, or maybe the personal assistants and
absolutely
production people. Obviously, the girlfriends and ex-wife have come out on various things that have, and he moved out of the house in the middle of the night, from what the last news report said. But I think that speaks exactly to what Andie was saying, where she was saying before that, like, is it criticism or is it accountability? Right? I mean, there's so much stuff that happens, particularly in Hollywood, as we've all learned, that people, are silent about, because it's, like there's this magic to working in the entertainment industry, and you just have to kind of like shut up, or like, brush the band guy's hand away from your hip, and
well, that crosses into what we were saying about Iceland being small, because the Hollywood industry, I think it was Dave Chappelle who was commenting on how small a group that really is. He did an interview with who's that old guy who always interviews all the famous people. I can't remember. He looks like John Lithgow or something. But he was saying how, you name your price going in, and then if it goes over that, that's when it's time to get out. But essentially, he was saying it was a small club. And so it's like when you hear Harvey Weinstein, and, I was binging Netflix, I'm looking at all the movies that his company was involved in, and all the stars that had come into contact with him. And then you hear all the stories, like everybody's heard a story, but nobody really, it's not something you really want to get into in case it's true. It's like, how the hell did Bill Cosby go 60 years? Never mind. But anyway, it's that thing. It's a small group. So when you have a small group policing itself, I'm not sure what we'd expect. But I'd also intersect that with, when we talk about cancel culture, and I really hate these pop terms that come up. It reminds me of George Carlin, all these the way we use language, it annoys the out of me. But anyway, because it's something that's so, it comes and it goes. It comes and it goes. We're not talking about cancel culture. Maybe we're just talking about accountability. I mean, the language we use needs to really cut to the point. It's like, and that's part of it too. There's a pushback on the right from this cancel culture, this politically correct, as they call it. But it's not that. It's just being accountable. Really, it's cut. We don't need the word. It's being accountable and being a decent human being. Okay, how about that? It's very simple, you know. And you know, cancel culture is like one person says, "Yeah, you should pay," and another person says, "Well, let them go," and then it's nothing in the end, you know. And I think there are some people that may actually come to a point of revelation where they can change, where they actually can see that they've done something wrong. I think there are people in different progressive levels of their humanity, and I think there's other people that need to go away to find it. And I'm certainly not the judge of anyone. I try to stay out of that unless it's just plainly clear cut. I mean, if you hurt somebody, you hurt somebody. There's no like, you know, there's the way we break things down, you know, the way I'm sorry, I'm getting off on the subject, but what I want to say is that really there's a bottom line, and the language that we use needs to just cut through the BS. And if people don't like the term cancel culture or politically correct, how about just be a decent human being?
I also think it's important to point out that I'd like to pay attention to who complains about cancel culture, because there's a little bit of hypocrisy at play that goes into this as well. Like, you remember when it turned out that the CEO of Goya Beans was a big time Trump supporter, and people were like, let's not buy Goya beans anymore. And like all these Republicans are like, oh, this is cancel culture gone too far. These same Republicans are today, like Fox News has been for 3-4 straight days now been talking about Mr. Potato Head and about how Hasbro has decided to just call it Potato Head, where they're saying like, let's not buy Hasbro anymore. So who gets to cancel who tends to be a little bit flexible, doesn't it?
Old white people get to cancel whoever they feel like, whenever they feel like. That's pretty much how it's been going. I mean, but if you think about it historically, that's what cancel culture kind of is. Like old white people deciding we don't like that anymore. It's canceled. It's over. It's not on trend. That is not how they felt about slavery. So.
Absolutely. I have an indigenous friend who lives in Greenland who recently posted this fantastic article that I put up later about how indigenous artists throughout the decades have been canceled, where like they don't get recognition. They're not invited to award shows for movies that they starred in. They're not invited to the Grammys for songs that became hits for them. Buffy Sainte-Marie is a great example of this. Indigenous artist who's written numerous songs with almost zero recognition in radio play, but the moment a usually white musician covers any of her songs, they get Grammys, they get awards for it. And so, yeah, marginalized people get canceled very easily. Like it goes to what you were saying earlier about how it testifies to who is considered expendable, really. Unfortunately so.
I have a question. Oh, I'm so sorry. No, I sometimes have these revelations, and now I'm going to say it out loud. But is cancel culture just colonization with a wig on? Because I just realized that when Andie spoke about Buffy Sainte-Marie, and I'm like, she is so right. That is so right. I'm going to explore that in my own head, but I had to say it out loud just to see if that sounded as crazy as it was in my head. Continue, Paula.
I always like when you have spontaneous thoughts because it's always brilliant. So no worries. I was just going to pick back up on this narrative of cancellation of Indigenous artists, and simultaneously there was something recently where a woman who is, she's a Native director, and she has gotten a lot of visibility around that, and has spoken up for other, particularly Cree directors and artists. And it's just recently been found out that she's not at all Native in any shape or form. And so it's put things into kind of a tizzy, because she became this kind of symbol, and like shows have now been canceled, right? Shows that had like significant numbers, like historically significant numbers of Cree and Lakota and Dakota, and lots of different members of the tribal communities who, like, on the one hand had roles because of her platform, and then immediately lost roles because of her platform and her lives. And there's a lot of discussion around her of like cancel culture, and like, look at all of the great things that she's done for the community as a whole. And I do think that that's I don't know, it's a significant thing. Like there's an awards program called the NAMMYs, and it's the Native American Music Awards. And it was born out of to this point, the Buffy St. Marie thing, like born out of the constant overlooking of Native American artists, both in Canada and in the States. And they've had to like kind of carve this whole other path, right? So it's, I think that, yeah, there's a lot to be said around, suddenly all of these white artists covering these songs, and like, oh my God, you're so brilliant. And they almost take some pride in doing covers of people that they know haven't been heard of, and kind of like, spin it to be like, look at how I'm celebrating these artists. There was a dust up too, just this past week at the end of Black History Month, because a university in the United States did a whole series of Black History Month events, but the final one, it culminated in this orchestral performance, and all of the performers are white, like, and so it was like, what in the planning process, and because they were performing Black music.
Well, it's Black History Month. Black people shouldn't have to work. Let white people do it.
Yeah.
Maybe that was their thinking. I don't know.
But it was just a major misstep, like,
there's opportunity there, but there's also, I mean, I like to always bring it back to just us being human, because none of us are perfect. And I think sometimes there are honest mistakes. There are people who honestly, because of their background or their education, don't know. And I've learned to separate that out. And I tell you, if I hadn't learned that, I would be a lot angrier than I am. And my wife had told me that, my wife being Icelandic. Because when I came here, the things that normally would be acceptable or unacceptable in the States seem to be acceptable here, and I didn't understand it quite. And for instance, if you say hi to someone and they don't say hi back to you, it's pretty much like telling them to F off in the States. And it's also a significant threat in the States. It can be a significant threat. So when I found that here, and there is, and that's the thing about that. Some people say, well, why should I say hi to you? I don't know you, kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, I've had this discussion with foreigners and Icelanders, and it's a strange thing where it wants to be excused, but it's actually, we know that's rude. We want to excuse that, but we know it's rude. I worked in a place for 5 years and had a boss that worked under, who would always come through our work And we would say, good morning, or going Diane, or hi, and she would say nothing. She would just literally ignore everybody. And it was so bad that after a while, nobody said hi to her anymore. Nobody wanted to be bothered with her anymore. And then she decided to start a workshop where you're supposed to be friendly at the workplace. So we had to go to a class to talk about this, and we were like, wait a minute, but it's our immediate supervisor is the one who doesn't talk to anybody. But that was kind of the ironic thing. But I like to bring it back that we all are human and we all make mistakes. And sometimes when we do cancel culture, I think we really need to look at the individual. There are obvious people who, commit crimes or go overboard, cross certain lines, yes. But there are other individuals that I think we got to be able to throw that back at ourselves a little bit. I mean, obvious, egregious things, yes. But I think if a person actually demonstrates that they really are mortified by what they've done or however, I think we should also consider that in this. And I don't even know. I mean, like I said, I try to bring it back to being human, but like there's so many historical really bad problems with men, women in the workplace, for instance, and imbalances of power and like just the whole Hollywood thing. It's like that's a long time coming. So I don't know if there's really, I mean, there comes a point where it's like, no, it's a long time. That should have been done years ago. And now there's really little tolerance. And that's where that cancel culture, at least in Hollywood, comes from, and why some complain about it, because it's like from nothing to like, you're done. But the point that I think some of the people who are like, maybe this is too much, they're not taking into consideration, it was always too much. It was always the problem. And that's the thing that happens with this cancel culture that I think people are struggling. Some people are struggling with, and it's finding that line. And it's also within the communities that we're speaking. Like you got Hollywood, the music industry. We got countries, the United States, huge historical imbalances. And I mean, you had a women's council in the United States dictating women policies with white men over 60. Like that doesn't make any sense. But that's how it was always done. And I hear that a lot in Iceland as well. Well, that's how it's done.
Especially this last couple of weeks. I mean, there are certainly women involved, but I mean, look what's happening with the PAP tests and HPV testing, right? Like, if you look at the media coverage, of course, there has been, the Minister of Health has now been more vocal in her footprint in that discussion. But for most of last week, it was this near elderly guy talking about this near elderly guy, and they were having this like mudslinging contest back and forth. And I felt as a woman who, like, what about those of us who have tests waiting to be analyzed? Like people just made a collective decision that this didn't fit into the budget. And like all of us are standing out here saying, but could you find, all right, like, can we argue about this later and maybe find a solution to, getting these test results? I mean, we've already had issues with somebody being misdiagnosed or her test being misread and, ended up with like them not catching a life-threatening cancer. I think that this should, maybe put aside, like, hey, maybe so we don't make that mistake again, we can just put that down for a minute and focus. But I want to bring up the point of the potato head, because I was watching that like crazy. And even in the PR and marketing groups that I'm in online, I was so flabbergasted by how upset people were getting about potato heads, and these same groups of people like just either minimize or gaslight or, you know, just really diminish, you know, things that I think are really important, right? Like what element of their nostalgia around their childhood is going to be impacted by the fact that Potato Head no longer just comes as a default male character.
No, you're giving it too much, Paula. I think you're giving it too much credit.
Okay.
I think you're thinking that they're intellectually being honest, and it's not. It's not that. I really don't believe it's that.
I think we're gonna have to save this conversation for a part 2 of this episode. I would like to thank everyone for contributing tonight, especially Andie. She was kind enough to join us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you.
It was an honor to be here and to speak with all of you and to listen to all of you.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining. And that was another episode of Work in Progress.
Our next episode will be on potato head.
Potato heads, as we see. Thank you.
Oh, can I just say that as far as Grapevine goes, if it wasn't for Grapevine, there was a lot going on in Iceland that I would not even know or even care to know. And it's because of that paper that I even started looking into like anything politics or anything going on in Iceland, because when I came here, I didn't read Icelandic, so.
I appreciate that.
There.
Thank
you to the Reykjavík Grapevine as well.
Thank you all for reading.